268 American soldiers saw their commander fall at Little Bighorn, yet not a single one survived to confirm it. For 148 years, we've accepted George Armstrong Custer died on that Montana ridge. But what if the most famous death in American military history never actually happened? 0 eyewitnesses from Custer's battalion survived that scorching June afternoon. Think about that. The death that defined American frontier mythology might be a lie. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some believe Custer escaped Little Bighorn, why the evidence seems compelling, and the shocking truth that changes everything we thought we knew. 3 revelations will shake your understanding of this battle. First, the mysterious body identification discrepancies that plagued investigators from day one. Second, native accounts that directly contradict the official story, claiming long hair wasn't even there. Third, the archaeological evidence uncovered over a century later that completely rewrites the battle's final moments. But here's where it gets insane. Why was Custer's body the only one not scalped or mutilated among 210 dead soldiers? How could experienced cavalry officers identify a body after it spent days decomposing in Montana's 95-degree heat? And what did the Lakota warriors mean when they kept insisting long hair wasn't there? How could America's most famous Indian fighter simply vanish from a battlefield surrounded by thousands of enemies? How could 148 years of history be based entirely on assumptions made by men who arrived 2 days after the shooting stopped? Even more disturbing, the brother who identified Custer's body harbored his own dark secret that might have influenced everything he claimed to see on that hillside. To understand how Custer could have escaped, we need to see how perfectly the chaos aligned that day. Because what happened at Little Bighorn wasn't just a battle, it was the perfect storm for a disappearance. If you're fascinated by history's greatest mysteries and the battles that shaped America, hit that like button and subscribe for more explosive revelations from the frontier wars. Now, let me take you back to that scorching June afternoon when everything we thought we knew began to unravel. The year 1876 found America drowning in its own contradictions. The Civil War had ended 11 years earlier, but the nation's appetite for conquest had only grown stronger. The frontier had become a pressure cooker where manifest destiny collided with indigenous survival, and George Armstrong Custer stood at the center of that explosion. They called him the boy general during the Civil War, the youngest general in Union history at just 23. His blonde hair flowing, his custom-made uniforms gleaming, Custer had become addicted to glory on those eastern battlefields. But the frontier offered a different kind of fame, and Custer craved it like a drug. He'd transformed himself from boy general to Indian fighter, seeing the Plains Wars as his path to the presidency itself. Then came the Black Hills betrayal. In 1874, Custer had led an expedition into the sacred Paha Sapa, the Black Hills, that the government had promised would remain Lakota territory forever. His announcement of gold discoveries shattered that treaty like glass. 20,000 miners flooded the sacred mountains within months. The Lakota and Northern Cheyenne had endured broken promises before, but this violation struck at their spiritual heart. Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa Lakota holy man, had seen enough. Through winter councils and pipe ceremonies, he'd done the impossible, united the Lakota bands with their traditional Cheyenne allies into the largest fighting force the Plains had ever seen. As spring 1876 bloomed, thousands of lodges gathered along the river the whites called Little Bighorn. What happened next defied all military logic. During the Sundance ceremony that June, Sitting Bull experienced a vision that would echo through history. He saw soldiers falling into the Lakota camp like grasshoppers from the sky, upside down, their ears cut off, unable to listen. The warriors interpreted this as prophecy. A great victory was coming. The power dynamics had shifted dramatically. The 7th Cavalry, despite its reputation, wielded single-shot Springfield carbines, while many warriors carried Winchester repeating rifles purchased from traders. The Army's great advantage, discipline, and firepower had evaporated. What they faced wasn't the scattered bands of popular imagination, but a motivated, well-armed Confederation defending their families. Custer rode toward this gathering storm with 647 men, exhausted horses, and hubris that bordered on madness. His regiment hadn't slept properly in days. His scouts, Crow and Arikara warriors who knew this country like their own heartbeat, warned him repeatedly about the village's impossible size. 7 miles of teepees, 10,000 souls, more warriors than the 7th Cavalry had bullets. But Custer suffered from a fatal character flaw. He believed his own legend. The boy general who'd charged through Confederate lines now convinced himself that Indians would scatter at the sight of his guidons. He'd beaten Black Kettle's Cheyenne at the Washita in 1868 through surprise attack. He'd do it again here. What he didn't understand was that everything had changed. This wasn't a winter camp of families caught sleeping. This was an armed confederation at the height of its power, led by Sitting Bull's spiritual authority and Crazy Horse's tactical genius, defending the last free gathering of plains tribes that would ever exist. But what Custer didn't know as he rode toward the Little Bighorn was that three separate mysteries were about to converge into either the perfect death or the perfect disappearance. Dawn on June 25th, 1876, found the 7th Cavalry strung out along the Wolf Mountains, divide like an exhausted snake. 647 men, their horses lathered with sweat from a brutal night march, single-shot carbines that would jam in rapid fire, and a commander who'd just made the most fateful decision of his life. Custer had divided his forces not once, but twice. First, he'd sent Captain Benteen with 3 companies on a fishing expedition to the south. 125 men, vanishing into broken country. Then he'd ordered Major Reno to take 3 more companies and attack the village from the south, another 175 soldiers. Custer kept 5 companies for himself, 210 men who would ride into legend or oblivion. Then something happened that nobody expected. When the Crow scouts showed Custer the valley from the Crow's Nest lookout, the morning haze lifted just enough to reveal the impossible. The Lakota Cheyenne village stretched 7 miles along the Little Bighorn, the largest gathering of Plains Indians in history. Conservative estimates put 1,500 to 2,000 warriors in those camps. Some witnesses would later claim 3,000. This is where the story takes a dark turn. Custer's scouts begged him to wait for reinforcements. Mitch Boyer, who'd lived among these tribes, told him bluntly, "If you attack this village, you and all your men will be killed." But Custer laughed. The boy general who'd shattered Confederate lines believed Indians would scatter like quail at his approach. The force massing below defied every assumption the army held. These warriors carried Winchester 1873 repeating rifles, Spencer carbines taken from dead soldiers, Henry rifles that could fire 16 shots without reloading. Many had more firepower than Custer's men with their single-shot Springfields. They'd stockpiled thousands of rounds through trading posts, preparing for exactly this moment. Here's the detail that changes everything. Custer had refused Gatling guns when offered, claiming they'd slow his march. He'd rejected a battalion of the 2nd Cavalry, 180 additional men, for the same reason. He'd even refused extra ammunition. His pack mules carried just 50 rounds per man, while warriors had bullets by the hundreds. The terrain itself had chosen sides. The Little Bighorn twisted through a valley of ravines, coulees, and high bluffs, perfect for ambush, nightmarish for cavalry. Every fold in the earth could hide 50 warriors. Every crossing exposed soldiers to crossfire. The river ran fast with spring snowmelt, its banks steep and crumbling. But witnesses reported something impossible about the commander profiles that morning. Custer, normally electric with energy before battle, seemed almost detached. Some officers later testified he appeared to be following a script only he could read. Crazy Horse, the Oglala warrior, prepared his men with unusual precision, painting hailstones on their horses' protection against soldier bullets. Sitting Bull, still weak from giving flesh at the Sundance, positioned himself with the women and children, but sent spiritual power to the warriors through sacred songs. The 7th Cavalry's exhaustion ran bone deep. They'd marched 70 miles in 24 hours. Their horses, already worn from weeks of campaigning, stumbled with fatigue. Men dozed in their saddles. Canteens ran low, a fatal oversight in 95-degree heat. Then came the testimony everyone wanted buried. Several soldiers from Reno's battalion later swore they saw Custer exchange clothes with his striker, John Berkman, just before the split. Berkman wore a buckskin jacket identical to Custer's, similar hat, even carried field glasses. In dust and chaos, at distance, who could tell them apart? 2 realities were about to collide. In one, George Armstrong Custer would lead the most famous cavalry charge in American history. In the other, he'd orchestrate the most audacious military disappearance ever attempted. Then Custer made the decision that either sealed his death or enabled his escape. He sent his last message to Benteen. "Come on, big village, be quick, bring packs." But by the time that note arrived, Custer had vanished northward with his doomed battalion. What happened next has 2 completely different versions, and the truth lies buried with 210 silent witnesses. At 3:00 p.m., June 25th, the theory begins. 2:00 p.m., brought the 7th Cavalry to a weathered teepee, standing alone on the divide, the burial lodge of a Sanzark warrior. Inside lay a scaffold and offerings. Outside gathered Custer and his officers for one final council. The decision made here would echo through eternity. This is where logic and legend collide. Custer divided his 5 companies yet again. He sent Captain Yates with F and I companies toward the river. Captain Keogh would take C, I, and L companies along the ridges. The plan seemed tactical genius or pure madness, depending on who survived to tell it. 3 o'clock arrived with thunder not from the sky, but from Major Reno's charge into the valley. His 175 men struck the village's southern edge like a hammer, sending women and children fleeing. But the warriors' response shattered every military expectation. Instead of scattering, they swarmed like angry hornets. Within 20 minutes, Reno lost 40 men and all cohesion. Meanwhile, Custer had vanished northward along the bluffs. Here's where the official story starts falling apart. The last white man to see him alive was trumpeter Giovanni Martini, sent back with that desperate message to Benteen. But Martini's testimony changed 3 times over the years. First, he claimed Custer was attacking. Then, Custer was simply riding north. Finally, decades later, Martini admitted he never looked back at all. The most damning evidence was what wasn't there: Crow Scout Curley's testimony. Curley escaped Custer's command sometime around 3:30, the only survivor from those 5 companies. But his stories conflicted wildly. To one officer, he claimed Custer died early in the battle. To another, he said Custer lived until the final moments. To a third, he admitted he fled before the real fighting began and saw nothing. But the real shock was still to come. Medicine Tail Coulee, where Custer supposedly first attempted to cross the river, holds the key to the entire mystery. White Cow Bull, a Lakota warrior, later described killing a buckskin-clad soldier at this crossing, but the details don't match Custer. This soldier had dark hair, wore sergeant's stripes, carried a Springfield, not Custer's custom Remington rifles. The evidence suddenly pointed in a shocking direction. Multiple warriors reported the same thing. A buckskin soldier died at Medicine Tail Coulee around 3:45, but he wasn't their primary target. They were hunting Long Hair, the one who'd attacked them on the Washita. Yet Long Hair seemed to have vanished like smoke. Let me show you the tactical geography that made escape possible. From Medicine Tail Coulee, ravines ran north and east like twisted highways. A single rider, in the dust and chaos of 2,000 warriors focusing on 210 soldiers, could have slipped through these defiles. The Rosebud Creek Valley lay just 8 miles east, and Custer knew General Terry's column was approaching from that direction. What they found next sent chills through the regiment. Private Peter Thompson, who'd gotten separated from Custer's battalion with a played-out horse, later testified he saw something extraordinary. Around 4 p.m., while hiding in a ravine, he observed a lone rider in buckskin racing eastward, away from the battle. The rider wore officer's gear but rode hunched over, face obscured. Thompson assumed it was a messenger, but no messages from Custer ever arrived. This is where the story takes its darkest turn. The body double theory suddenly gains credibility when you realize John Berkman, Custer's striker, was found days later wearing an officer's buckskin jacket, shot through the chest and temple, exactly where Custer's body showed wounds. Berkman had styled his hair long like Custer's, had similar height and build. In the dust and gunsmoke, warriors shooting at buckskin might have killed the wrong man. Witnesses describe killing a commander, but the details don't match Custer. They mentioned dark hair when Custer's was golden. They described a beard when Custer was clean-shaven that morning. They claimed the buckskin soldier fought with a saber when Custer's remained with the pack train. The timeline splits here into parallel realities. Official version: Custer leads his men north from Medicine Tail Coulee, climbing toward what becomes Last Stand Hill, fighting a running battle against overwhelming odds. Conspiracy version: Custer sends Berkman forward in his clothes while he slips away through the ravines, knowing his battalion is doomed, choosing survival over glory. Then physics intervened in an unexpected way. Dust clouds from thousands of Indian ponies created a curtain of concealment. Visibility dropped to mere yards. In this chaos, individual identification became impossible. A determined rider could vanish into the haze while his men died, believing he led them still. The next 47 minutes would either see Custer's death or his disappearance. What happened in those missing minutes has haunted historians for over a century. Because when the dust settled, when the shooting stopped, when Terry's men climbed that ridge 2 days later, they found something that defied explanation. Then came the moment when history split into two versions. As Custer's battalion climbed from Medicine Tail Coulee toward the ridges, as hundreds of warriors closed in from every direction, the greatest mystery of the American West was about to be written in blood or orchestrated in shadow. 3:30 p.m. marked the moment 210 men last drew breath as a cohesive unit. Custer's 5 companies, C, E, F, I, and L climbed from Medicine Tail Coulee onto the ridges above the Little Bighorn. Below them, the valley exploded with warriors streaming north to cut off their escape. Above them, more fighters raced along parallel ridges. The 7th Cavalry had ridden into a closing jaw of death. But here's what doesn't add up about the standard narrative. 2 stories now run parallel, one of heroic death, one of calculated escape. In the official version, Custer leads his men in running battles along the ridges. In the conspiracy version, the switch has already happened at Medicine Tail Coulee, and John Berkman in Custer's clothes leads doomed men while the real Custer slips eastward. 4 o'clock brought the storm. 2,000 warriors struck Custer's battalion like a thunderbolt. The soldiers had spread across nearly a mile of ridgeline too far to support each other, too scattered to concentrate fire. For every blue-coated soldier, 100 warriors circled like wolves. The sensory chaos defied description. Dust clouds rose hundreds of feet, turning afternoon into twilight. Winchester rifles cracked in rolling thunder. Eagle-bone whistles shrieked. Horses screamed as bullets found them. The ground itself seemed to shake from thousands of ponies' hooves. This is the moment history wants you to forget the statistics tell an impossible story. Archaeological evidence shows 2,000 rounds fired for every soldier killed. That's not a battle. It's suppressing fire while something else happens. Modern battlefield analysis reveals soldiers firing in controlled volleys, not the panic fire of men about to die. 4:15 brought the first collapse. C Company, under Captain Tom Custer George's brother, held the southern flank. Gaull's warriors struck them like a sledgehammer. But then witnesses reported something impossible. Several Lakota fighters later swore they saw 2 men in buckskin during this fight, one leading C Company's defense, another observing from a distant ravine. The dust so thick, warriors shot each other by mistake. In this murk, a single rider could vanish, while hundreds died. The official story claims all 5 companies fought together, but native accounts place them scattered across 3 miles, impossible to command, perfect for abandonment. 4:30 saw I Company overrun near Deep Ravine. 28 men tried to flee toward the river. None made it, but here's where it gets insane. Bodies were found in that ravine, still clutching unfired cartridges. These men died without fighting back. Why? Unless they were looking for someone who wasn't there, someone they expected to lead them to safety. Native accounts place Custer at the river, where no body was found. White Cow Bull insisted he killed Longhair at Medicine Tail Crossing. Red Horse drew pictures showing the buckskin soldier falling near water. 2 Moons described watching Longhair die before the soldiers climbed the hill. Yet the official story places Custer's death on Last Stand Hill 45 minutes later. Statistical shock hits hard here. Between 4:30 and 5 p.m., 110 soldiers died, over 3 per minute. No army in history collapsed that fast while maintaining defensive positions. Unless they weren't defending. Unless they were searching for a commander who'd vanished. 4:45 brought F Company's desperate stand under Captain Yates. His men formed a skirmish line along Cemetery Ridge, carbines growing hot from rapid fire. Then came the testimony that changed everything. Several warriors reported these soldiers seemed to be signaling someone waving guidons not at the enemy but eastward, toward the Rosebud Breaks. But then, Custer allegedly switched clothes. The conspiracy theory's crucial moment places the switch here, in the chaos of F Company's fight. Berkman, already wearing similar buckskin, takes Custer's distinctive hat and field glasses. In dust and distance, who could tell? The real Custer drops military gear, becomes another panicked soldier fleeing through ravines. 5 o'clock brought E Company's annihilation. Lieutenant Smith's Grey Horse Troop, the most visible unit, with their light-coloured mounts, drew warriors like magnets. They died in a valley that became a killing field. But forensic evidence revealed something disturbing. These men's bodies showed wounds from multiple directions, not just from Indians, but possibly from friendly fire in the dust and chaos. Then the strangest discovery shattered assumptions. Vic, Custer's personal horse, was found 3 days later near Rosebud Creek, 15 miles from the battlefield. The horse bore Custer's personal brand, carried his saddle, How did it travel that far? Horses don't abandon their fallen riders, unless the rider wasn't fallen, unless he needed that horse for escape. 210 bodies would fall in a 30-minute window. The mathematics of death don't support the official timeline. Modern fire rate analysis shows Custer's men expended approximately 15,000 rounds. Warriors fired perhaps 50,000. In clear conditions, that ammunition would create casualties in the thousands. In dust-choked chaos, it created confusion perfect for disappearance. 5:15 brought L Company's final stand. Captain Calhoun Custer's brother-in-law tried to form a defensive square. His men died in perfect skirmish formation, boots still in stirrups. These soldiers never broke, never ran. They died waiting for orders from a commander who'd either fallen or fled. 40 men saw something that changed everything. A rider in buckskin racing through their position, not fighting but fleeing. Some survivors from Reno's command later claimed they glimpsed this figure through field glasses from their defensive position 4 miles south. But when questioned, they were told they'd seen nothing. The sensory details of those final minutes paint horror. Dust so thick men vomited from breathing it. Heat so intense cartridges cooked off in chambers. Warriors so numerous they formed living walls of death. The smell of gunpowder, blood, and fear creating a battlefield cocktail that survivors never forgot. But then came the revelation that changes everything. As the last organized resistance collapsed, as E and F companies died in their valleys, warriors found something unexpected on what would become Last Stand Hill. About 40 men had gathered there, but they weren't fighting. They stood in a rough circle, some already dead on their feet, others firing mechanically. In their center lay a body in buckskin, already dead. 2 wounds, chest and temple. The chest wound had bled profusely, staining the yellow cavalry scarf. The temple wound hadn't bled at all, administered after death. Someone had made very sure this buckskin soldier was dead. Character revelation strikes like lightning. That body wore Custer's clothes but carried Tom Custer's pocket watch. It had Custer's field glasses but Berkman's personal effects. In death, identity blurred beyond recognition. The warriors, focused on killing soldiers, didn't stop for identification. They'd shot buckskin and moved on. 5:30 brought silence. The greatest cavalry disaster in American history had taken less than an hour. 210 men lay scattered across 3 square miles of Montana ridges, but the most damning evidence was still to come. Because when the dust settled, when warriors returned to count coup and take trophies, they found something, or didn't find something, that would fuel conspiracy theories for 15 decades. Pattern interrupt 10 arrives with brutal clarity. The strangest part was yet to come, because among 210 mutilated bodies, one would remain untouched. Among 210 clear identities, one would stay mysteriously vague. Among 210 witnessed deaths, one would lack any eyewitness at all. When the dust settled, the mystery had just begun. June 27th dawned with buzzards circling by the hundreds. General Terry and Colonel Gibbon's relief column approached the Little Bighorn Valley with growing dread. Crow scouts had already brought horrifying news, soldiers scattered like buffalo bones across the ridges. At 11 a.m., they found the first bodies. 204 corpses sprawled across 3 miles of scorched earth. The Montana sun had already begun, its grim work faces blackened, bodies bloated beyond recognition. The smell carried for miles, sending horses into panic. Soldiers vomited as they climbed toward Last Stand Hill. What they found there would haunt them forever. The search for Custer began immediately. Officers who'd served with him for years stumbled among the dead, seeking their commander. On the highest point of what soldiers already called Last Stand Hill, they found a cluster of bodies. In their center lay a corpse in buckskin jacket, 2 wounds, visible chest and temple. But identification problems arose instantly. The heat decomposition had ravaged the body after 55 hours. The face, swollen and discolored, bore no resemblance to the boy general's famous features. Hair, mysteriously, had been cut short or fallen out. The distinctive flowing locks that earned Custer his Lakota name, long hair, were absent. This is where the conspiracy gains its greatest credibility. Captain Tom Custer lay nearby, so mutilated that identification required checking tattoos. Boston Custer, the general's civilian brother, was found shot through the head. Nephew Harry Armstrong Reed, just 18, lay among the dead. Brother-in-law James Calhoun died with his L Company. Every male Custer relative present had died, except they were all found and identified. So who identified George? The official report claims Tom Custer identified his brother's body by a scar. but Tom had been dead for 2 days, his body so mutilated that his own identification required forensic examination. Dead men tell no tales, or identify no brothers. The body condition anomaly defies explanation. Among 210 corpses, this was the only one not mutilated. No scalping, though Custer's golden hair would have been the greatest trophy. No dismemberment, though warriors had spent hours among the dead. 2 neat wounds, the chest wound had bled, indicating life when inflicted. The temple wound showed no bleeding, a post-mortem insurance shot. Native respect theory claims warriors honored a brave enemy, but warriors mutilated Tom Custer beyond recognition, and he'd won 2 medals of honor. They destroyed other officers equally brave. Why spare this one body? Unless they didn't recognize it as anyone important, unless it wasn't who everyone assumed. Here's what military historians don't want discussed. The burial detail, exhausted and revolted, worked hastily. Shallow graves, barely 18 inches deep, scratched into hard earth. No formal identification process, no forensic examination. They buried who they thought they found and moved on. Then came the testimony that changed everything. Lakota and Cheyenne accounts uniformly insisted long hair was not among the dead. Chief Gall stated, "We killed the soldier chief at the river." 2 Moons reported, "Long hair died early, before the hill fight." Pretty Shield, the Crow woman who lived among the Lakota, swore they never found Longhair's body because he wasn't there. But witnesses reported something impossible. Kate Bighead, a Cheyenne woman who witnessed the battle's aftermath, described seeing a buckskin body that warriors ignored. She said it looked like a white man dressed as someone important but wasn't recognized as any particular enemy. The clothing marked status, but the face meant nothing to those who'd fought Longhair before. Conflicting native stories should have raised alarms. How could experienced warriors who'd fought Custer at the Washita not recognize their greatest enemy? How could the man they called Longhair die at the river, on the ridge, early in battle, late in battle, all simultaneously? Unless different warriors killed different men in buckskin, unless the real Longhair never made that final ride. Statistical shock pounds home truth. 53 bodies were never positively identified. The army labeled them unknown soldiers and moved on. Any of these could have been Berkman, dressed in Custer's clothes. The striker's body was never officially found convenient for a man supposedly wearing his commander's jacket. What they found next sent chills through the regiment. In Custer's supposed pockets, they discovered Tom Custer's personal effects mixed with items belonging to other men. The field glasses were there, but the lens caps belonged to Lieutenant Cook. The watch was military issue but bore no personal engraving. The pistols were standard army, not Custer's custom Remington rolling blocks. One detail would haunt investigators for decades. The buckskin jacket, supposedly Custer's signature garment, bore manufacturer's marks from St. Louis. But Custer's jackets came from a tailor in Detroit. This jacket was newer, showed different wear patterns, had regulation military buttons instead of Custer's preferred bone buttons. Someone dressed this body to be found as Custer. The hurried burial completed. Terry's column retreated with their wounded. They carried a story of heroic last stands and gallant death. They needed heroes for a shocked nation. They got one, manufactured from assumptions and necessity, because admitting uncertainty meant admitting failure. Admitting Custer might have fled meant destroying American military mythology at its foundation. But the battle's end revealed something far more disturbing than death. It revealed how easily history could be written by assumption, how desperately America needed its heroes to die gloriously rather than live shamefully, how a body in buckskin could become whoever the nation required. The immediate aftermath revealed political machinery grinding into motion. Within days, newspapers nationwide blazed with headlines of Custer's heroic last stand. The government needed a martyred hero, not military disaster. They certainly didn't need questions about whether their hero had abandoned his men. Reno's Court of Inquiry in 1879 sealed lips that might have spoken truth. Officers who'd survived that day testified carefully, their words measured, their implications clear. Don't disturb the legend. When questions arose about identification, about conflicting native accounts, about the mysterious body conditions, the court redirected to safer ground. Elizabeth Bacon Custer, widowed at 34, began her 57-year campaign to protect her husband's memory. She outlived every officer who might have contradicted the official story, dying in 1933 at 91. Her books, lectures, and fierce litigation against critics created the Custer myth more than any battle could. A living widow defending a dead hero proved more powerful than any conspiracy theory. But forensic evidence revealed something disturbing. The 1985 archaeological survey, using metal detectors and modern battlefield analysis, shattered the Last Stand mythology. No defensive positions existed on Last Stand Hill. No organized resistance patterns appeared. Instead, evidence showed soldiers running, scattering, dying in pursuit, rather than defense. The heroic Last Stand never happened. It was invented to make disaster palatable. Modern analysis revealed bullet patterns indicating the battle lasted minutes, not hours. Soldiers fired few rounds before being overrun. The famous circle of death existed only in imagination. Men died running, not standing. They died scattered, not united. They died without their commander, regardless of who wore his clothes. Here's the final revelation that changes everything. Whether Custer died on that ridge or escaped to obscurity matters less than why we needed him dead. America required martyrs for manifest destiny, heroes to justify continental conquest. A commander who fled would have undermined everything. A commander who died gloriously justified everything. The conspiracy theory persists because it satisfies our need for mystery, our suspicion of official stories, our desire for hidden truth. No survivors from 5 companies means no witnesses. Questionable body identification feeds doubt. Conflicting native accounts suggest confusion. Political necessity for heroes implies cover-up potential. Custer's ego certainly could have conceived such deception, but the truth was both simpler and more tragic. Archaeological evidence, native testimony taken together, and military analysis all point to the same conclusion. Custer died with his men, probably early in the battle, possibly at Medicine Tail Coulee, where warriors claimed. The body on Last Stand Hill might have been Berkman, might have been Custer, might have been any officer in buckskin. In Death's democracy, identity mattered less than mythology. The real mystery isn't whether Custer escaped, but why we needed him to die heroically. 268 men saw their commander's final moments. They died with that knowledge. Whether that commander was Custer or his striker wearing buckskin becomes academic. The 7th Cavalry was destroyed. The Plains tribe's freedom ended. American expansion continued. The mythology served its purpose. What really happened on that dusty ridge remains locked in the silent testimony of 268 dead men. But their silence speaks volumes about the stories nations tell themselves, the heroes they create from disaster, the mysteries they preserve to make truth bearable. In the end, Custer's Last Stand stands not as history but as necessity, the legend America needed, whether or not it happened.